All right, so I think everyone has had the opportunity to go ahead and mosey on in. So let's go ahead and get started. So to do some brief introductions, my name is Alyssa Coltrain. I am the Director of College Admissions for Ivy Experience, which essentially means that along with my colleagues, we help students through every part of the college admissions process, from brainstorming essays all the way through drafting and revising to this part of the process where we're starting to navigate the new and shiny Common App. Jordan and Kevin, do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Go first, Kevin. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Kevin Trudel. I'm a senior college admissions specialist here at Ivy Experience. I do have a background in admissions, having worked for the admissions offices of the University of California, Berkeley and Grinnell College. I really enjoy working with our families and just helping families and young adults in general kind of figure out what their next steps are going to be in their career and their education journey, as in the case for most of our families. So, yeah, excited to sort of talk with our families here today.
And my name is Jordan Holmes. I am the Assistant Director of College Admissions at Ivy Experience. Like Kevin and Alyssa, I'm also working with students and families on their essays and applications. Similar to Kevin, I also worked in undergraduate admission as an undergrad admission officer at Penn American and the University of Southern California as well. I'm also the higher ed nerd in the office. You have a question, I have a long-winded answer for you, kind of like this intro. But either way, again, working with students and families on their essay process.
Yes. And as a housekeeping note, we are absolutely here to take every single one of your questions. We are going to do a Q&A section at the end of this webinar. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop them into the Q&A section, and we'll tackle all of them at the end of our discussions. So today we're essentially going to be focusing on the common application itself and to give everyone just a little bit of grounding. This is one of the slides that if you have attended any of our webinars, you are familiar with the 6 factors under your control. These are the components that will affect a student's chances of admissions at any college or university. Grades and rigor, standardized testing, letters of recommendation, extracurriculars, the essay and applications, which will be the feature of tonight, as well as we say the college list, not because it, of course, affects your chances of admission to a given university or college, but it does affect the options that a student has on the table at the end of this process when they are ultimately making this decision about where you're going to attend. So this presentation is focusing in on essays and applications, specifically on the Common App or Common Application itself. As many of you are probably well aware, we have some, rising seniors in the audience as well as some rising juniors. The Common App is a centralized portal for college applications. That being said, it is not the only portal for college applications. There may be, for those of you who are applying to the University of California schools, they have their own application. Georgetown has its own application. Some of the New York public schools have their own applications. But for the vast majority of students, they will be applying to at least one, if not several colleges through the Common App. The reason why we are timing our webinar today on, in early August is the Common App officially opens on August 1st. That is the moment when rising seniors can go in and actually start to hit submit on their applications. But one of the things that we really want to emphasize throughout this process is not a lot changes from year to year when it comes to supplemental essays, the design of the application itself. We're definitely going to highlight a couple of really interesting and exciting changes that we've noticed in this year's Common App, but the majority of it does not change from year to year. So juniors, a lot of what you're going to see tonight is still going to be applicable. There are many things that you can be thinking about, essay prompts that you can be thinking through so you can get a head start on this process. The Common App is going to contain 6 or 7 tabs, depending on the schools that you apply to, for the baseline application, that central piece that goes to every single school, as well as supplemental questions and essays for specific schools. One of the things that we noticed in the Common App today was that it definitely got a little bit of a facelift. It definitely looks like it belongs in 2025 as opposed to the older version, which definitely had a little bit of 90s graphic design going on there. But in this place, you can see all of the tabs of the baseline application, including the courses and grades section, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, and isn't necessarily something that every student is going to have to fill out. When it comes to setting up a Common App, seniors, if you haven't done this yet, now is a great opportunity to do so. Juniors, you are able to do so as well and start checking things out, seeing what is there. You can do this at any time because information in those base tabs, the ones that you saw in the prior screen and the ones that we're going to start off by talking about tonight, should roll over when the Common App relaunches in next August. That being said, if there's anything that you've absolutely perfected, you can always download a PDF for review just in case. Another note when you are creating your account, if at all possible, students should use a personal email rather than one that comes from the school. And there are a couple of reasons for this. First is that email address is going to be the email address that schools use to communicate with students. And as waitlists become more and more of a factor in the college admissions process, that may mean that schools are reaching out to students to communicate waitlist decisions after graduation, reaching out in July and August when students may or may not have access to their school email accounts. So use a personal email address. It also can be useful for recovering your password later if you want to transfer schools later on and find yourself going, you know, that Y major essay that I wrote for UNC was actually really good. I wonder if I could take that as, a rough draft and polish it up and use it for my transfer applications. It's a lot easier to come back to that and recover your account if you still have access to the email address that you used. That being said, try and use a fairly professional sounding email address. This is the email address that your admissions officers are going to be using to communicate with you. So think about whether or not you want a 30, 40, 50-year-old adult typing in this particular email address when they need to reach out to you. We've had some students talk about the amount of sort of spam email and marketing emails that they get from colleges. So it may even be a great option, especially for rising juniors, if you haven't quite started to get all of the emails from all of the colleges. Set up a separate email account specifically for your college admissions work. That's how you can set up your Common App account. That's how you can be in touch with colleges. That still keeps everything else you might want to do in your normal personal email separate, and everything's a little bit more under control. Now we're going to jump into those base tabs, starting off with the profile and family sections. These are the first two sections that you're going to fill out in this process. They are tedious, if a little bit straightforward. If you have nitty-gritty questions about these parts, we can certainly jump into them in the chat, share our screens, walk through the Common App. But this is the place where students list contact information, demographic information, personal information, where their parents went to college, if they have any siblings. This is absolutely email information that you want to double check before you submit. We have had students misspell their own addresses before when were working with a student on something else and happened to see their Common App. Double check all of this information before you submit. The other really important part for this is if your family is applying for financial aid through the federal government and intends on filling out the FAFSA, your student needs to be sure that their social security number is added to the Common App because that is how these two systems sync to each other. That is sort of the distinct and identifying piece of information that allows those two documents to talk to each other. After that, you're going to have the Education tab. In this section, you are going to provide information about your high school, your grades, and the courses that your student is taking. In this case as well, many school counselors will reach out around this time to provide that information. Does your school provide a class rank? If so, is it truly a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 ranking, or is it by decile? How are your courses organized? Are they by semester or by marking period? So communicate with your school counselor to ensure that you have the correct information about your high school. You should also be aware of the high school transfer and change in progression questions. These two questions don't appear unless a student indicates that they have transferred high schools during the 9th through 12th grade period of time, or that there has been a change in their progression. They have redone a year, they have skipped a year, they have taken a gap year. In that case, these two questions give the students an opportunity to contextualize why that change in progression or why that transfer happened. The final thing I want to flag here, and then we'll chat a little bit about the honors section in the Education tab, is that, and we field this question all the time because one of the things that we do is we'll get students started early on this section of the application. It's a great thing to fill out in January when you might be busy with school and you have the little bits and pieces of time. When the Common App is asking for your current year courses, these are your senior year courses. And as much as possible, write the names of these courses out in a way that matches your transcript. Ideally, an admissions officer looks at the education section, looks at the transcript and goes, yep, everything here makes sense. I don't have any concerns or questions about any inconsistencies that I see between the two. Another major component of the Education tab is going to be the honors section. This section is for academic honors only. These are going to be honors where sort of the primary qualification is going to be academically oriented, not necessarily the place to list athletic awards. Those might go in the activities section or the additional information section if a student is, has a lot of awards that they need to list, but these are specifically for academics. Things that can count include honor roll counts, AP Scholar or AP Scholar with distinction counts. Depending on what a student wants to highlight, this can also be a place to list National Honor Society or any of the subject specific subject-specific honor societies, art honor society, French honor society, what have you. In this moment, the reason why you would choose to include National Honor Society here rather than the activity tab depends on what you want to highlight in this given moment. If what's important to your student is that they met the qualifications, sent in the application and were selected for National Honor Society, but maybe it's only happening in senior year. They haven't had a chance to really get involved, do the volunteering so that they have something that they could write really robustly about in the activity section. Or maybe you have a lot of activities you've filled up on your 10. This can be a great place to highlight those honor societies in a way that doesn't require a student to either try and fill that 150 character activity description or to reserve those activity slots for something else that may be more meaningful for them. The other thing to bear in mind here is to choose the level of honor correctly. More often than not, one of the things that we get asked a lot about this, and Jordan, I know you've griped about this, so feel free to chime in, is National Honor Society. That is, in fact, a school level honor.
Yes, it is something that you are compared to other people within your school, not necessarily nationally. Yes, there is a national standard, but at the same time, you are getting the school designation as opposed to a national designation. It might seem small, but it's important to try and make things as accurate as possible. Ultimately, if you accidentally put something national or you guess incorrectly, it's not the end of the world. It's completely okay. Mission officers generally will know that National Honor Society ends up being a school thing, and maybe a district or regional award might be something that is better told being state or school, depending on what the award actually is.
All right, perfect. So those are the first three sections of the Common App. These sections have stayed almost entirely the same, but I'm going to hand it over now for a couple of sections where we have had some interesting changes coming up. So let's get into the testing section.
Yeah, so for the testing section, that's where you would report your AP scores, your ACT scores, your SAT scores. It's one of those things that it is kind of straightforward in that respect. But where it gets a little bit tricky, right, is that some of the colleges you may be applying to may require you to send an official score report from the College Board, from the ACT. Another tricky part of this is that we have something new this year. The ACT had a rework, and there's a science section, as I'm sure many of the families are aware in the chat are aware. Um, so with that said, the science section is optional. However, some schools require it and some schools don't, right? So it's one of those things that because it's new, because it's optional, and because all schools don't have a consistent answer for whether they want it or not, you need to check individually with each school you're applying to sort of see whether you're going to need to send it in. Um, and you're also going to sort of be aware of how it affects your composite as well, right? Because that is something that the admissions offices look at. So, if you have kind of further questions from that, don't hesitate to reach out to a school counselor. If you're working with us, please reach out to us. We're happy to help you to look at those schools with you to see whether you'll need to send it in as an ACT science score. So that is kind of a tricky section for this year because of that change of the ACT. I guess maybe let's move on to another section, the activity section. So I'm sure most people are aware by now, you put your activities into the Common Application. It is kind of tricky because there are some limitations for how you can describe things. But with that said, right, the couple things that families worry about when they fill out that activities list is one, is at a high level, is a macro level. What do I do with the order? How do I list out these activities, on a high level, right? And when it comes to that, don't sweat it too much, right? An admissions office is not going to accept or reject you on the basis of whether you list something third or fifth, right? Or fourth or fifth or fifth or seventh, right? So don't sweat too much. Now, with that said, you don't want to bury the lead, right? If you or your son or daughter has done an activity for 4 years and they're the president of it and they're highly, highly involved with something. You don't want to bury the lead. You want to try that, put that activity more towards the top, right? And a tip I like to give families, right, is if you are really just not sure where to even start, right? Because that I think is oftentimes one of the tripping points. Start out by listing your activities by the ones you spent out the most time on, the ones you spent the least time on, right? Now within that, that'll give you a good starting point. Within that, then you can start making those little adjustments, right? Because maybe that activity that you spent the third or fourth most amount of time on is actually super impressive, right? And was with like a national organization and you did something with, multiple groups, right? And so maybe you slide that up a couple spots, but at least at that starting point, you got a place to start, you can make your adjustments and you have a way to move forward, right? I think the last note, and we do advise this is, hey, don't be afraid to review this as a family or to get a second pair of eyes on it to kind of make sure that nothing gets missed because you only have 10 slots. Some families, they have a hard time getting that 10. So sometimes someone else can help you think of something that you did that you forgot. And also to kind of maybe highlight something that's important that's not on there. I guess the next thing about activities is when we look at it a little bit more sort of granularly, like what that section itself looks like. What the activities themselves look like, right? How should I write out my activities? How should I approach that? Um, so there are certain restrictions, right? I think the challenge here for a lot of families and a lot of students is that you have distinct character limits, for example, how to describe your activities. So you have to be formal, you have to take a smart approach about it. So write it in resume format, be specific, right? We have an example here. Coach 10 to 12 students, manage equipment and schedule, communicate with parents, maintain Instagram of 5+ followers, donate proceeds to Red Cross. Now, what you may notice about that example, right, is that you're not writing in complete sentences. You're not writing a paragraph for each activity because you have that constraint, right? You could take advantage of punctuation and semicolons, right, we use here. And you want to use verbs to really kind of get the cross as efficiently as you can, right? Now, as part of this activity section, there's different sections within each activity, right? So that is, example is a description of an activity. But you also have a position or leadership description, and you have an organization description, right? An organization name description as well. And you want to be smart about that, right? And the example that we've listed here, I think it's a great one for ones where you are engaged in activity where there's been progression, right? Because this student, if they're at a publication, they probably just started out writing for the school newspaper, and then there was progression over time. They were the opinion editor 10th, 11th grade. They were the editor in chief in 12th grade. And you can format it in this way, right? You can lead with the most impressive thing, highlight when you did it, and give the full progression of how you've done, and which positions you've been in within that club or organization, right? You can use that for a sport, varsity or JV, right? Varsity, maybe 11th, 12th grade, JV, 9th and 10th grade as an example, right? The other thing here is, the organization name, where obviously you need to list out the name of the club or the organization you're involved in. But sometimes it's helpful to kind of put in a comma and then explain what that organization does, right? Because while most admissions officers will probably understand what the varsity basketball team is, right? They see team laughter, as I see in this example. We have no idea what that would be. Is that it could be a charitable organization, like has been explained in the slide, but it could also be an improv group for all we know, right? So sometimes it's smart to kind of take advantage of that space to explain what that organization is. And let's move on to maybe the most time-intensive section, which I'll hand off to Jordan.
So as Kevin said, the writing section is probably the section you will end up spending the most time working on, maybe not in the common application itself, but for sure in general for the application. This is where you put in your common application essay, also known as a personal statement. This is the 650-word essay that will be sent to every single school that you apply to using the common application. Now, as far as the changes go, there actually haven't been a lot of changes, especially in the past few years. The 7 prompts that you see here on the screen are the 7 prompts that have been the same for years at this point. You can get started now. If you're a junior, you can start thinking about what sort of things you want to respond to in these prompts. Ultimately, however, these 7 prompts are just guidelines. Speaking as a former admission officer, and I'm sure Kevin would agree, that these are really just guidelines. They're just places for you to start. Because what this essay is really meant to do is showcase who you are as a human being. They're not looking for anything specific. They, being admission officers, are not looking for anything specific. There's not a magic word or phrase that you can say to get into college. It's really more so sharing what's important to you, how you see the world, and maybe the little things about you that can speak to who you will be as a community member on campus. So again, just start thinking about these. These are great places to start and great things to start thinking about. But again, they have not changed in a very long time, so you absolutely can start thinking about them right now. As you write your essay, we encourage you to write it elsewhere on a separate Word doc, on a Google Doc, on your Notes app, wherever it happens to be, and then copy and paste it into the application itself. If you do end up working with us, you will end up working a lot on Google Docs. However, there is an option to link a Google Doc file onto the Common App. Please don't do that because as an admission officer, I do not need to see all 79 previous drafts that you have done before. Feel free to just copy and paste it into the Common application itself, do a final proofread of it, read it out loud, things like that, and make sure that you are catching any errors and then sending it off once you are done. We now talk about a couple of optional sections on the Common Application, and these are the actually optional things. Sometimes supplemental essays will say optional. These are really optional. Of all of our students, about 90% of our students do not use the additional information section. However, it can be really helpful. And there's actually been some changes in that there's the additional information section, and we'll talk about the challenges and circumstances sections next. So what these two sections do are add additional context to your application. Specifically with the additional information section, this is a lot more about specific additional pieces that didn't fit elsewhere on your application. As Kevin just talked about, you have 10 slots on the additional info, or rather on the activity section, and you have 5 slots in the honors and awards section, but maybe you have a sixth one that's really important to you. You can use the additional information section here to talk about extra awards, extra activities. Maybe if you want to speak a little bit more about Team Laughter, maybe they did a little bit more that you want to give some additional context to, you can continue to add to that here as well. So additional info, a little bit more about the context and the pieces that you have already written on your application. Again, the new challenges and circumstances section is really meant to showcase things that are a little bit more personal, things that don't fit on the application elsewhere, that have to do with a multitude of the things that the Common App actually verbatim says here. Back in February, they announced that this is going to be a change that they would make to their application. And you can see here, there's a wide variety of the kinds of things that you can talk about here, especially about natural disasters, if there's a flood, a hurricane, a fire, anything else that happens that affected you personally, anything having to do with family situations, things that are a little bit more personal in nature. These are the types of things, and this is rather the section where these types of things can go. We always advise students to be really direct about this, talk about what happened, when it happened, how it affected you, and how you move on from that. But again, if you're working with us and you feel like you do have something that you would like to talk with us about, we can advise you as far as what is and is not appropriate to put here, and then help you draft those sections as well. But just so you know, these are the types of things that are on the Common Application for right now. The courses and grades section is kind of a finicky section in that not every single school will require this. However, once you do have one school that does require it, you will have to fill it out for that one school. This is a section where the college or university will require that you have your transcript open on a separate page or printed out, and you type it in verbatim as closely as you can, showcasing the grades that you got, the classes that you took, the credits that you received, and eventually your GPA as well. Some schools will require you to enter in the same information on a third-party website. It used to be called the SSAR or the SRAR. They have now merged into one system called the STARS report because they really like acronyms. I'm not sure why. But this is a central location where, again, you'll have your transcript. You will enter it in specifically on that website, and then you will send it off to the other schools that require it. Our recommendation is, again, not only to have your transcript open next to you while you do this, but also to create a central STARS account and send it out to the multiple schools because you do not want to have to do this again for each individual school that you have to apply to.
Yes. For those of you who are working with us, please check out folder 5 in your Google Drive. There is a step-by-step screenshot of exactly how to do this because we understand how persnickety of a process this is. With that, we're going to move out of the base Common App and into the Schools tab.
So again, that is all in the base common application. That will go to every single school. That will be exactly the same. The schools tabs is when you then type in the names of the individual school that you would like to apply to. And there are individual tabs that will say University X, University Y, University Z, and you will go into each of those and fill out the information that's there. One common part of this section is all about letters of recommendation. Now, we typically require, or rather, we suggest rather, that students ask two core subject teachers from their junior year who know them well. Again, as a former admission officer, it's really important that that know them well part is paid attention to. So make sure that you're asking a teacher who knows you, a teacher who maybe you go after school to ask for extra help, or they're also a club advisor or a coach or something like that. And they can speak to who you are not only in the classroom, but also out of the classroom as well. We absolutely recommend that you do that just so you can have the strongest recommendations possible. There is a tricky little law called FERPA, which is about family privacy, and it gives applicants and families rights to say, hey, you should not share this information, or rather that we should have access to this information. However, with recommendation letters, we do say that you have to waive your FERPA rights, which means that you are waiving your ability to see the letters of recommendation so that the teachers can write an objective letter. But if you've chosen correctly, there's nothing to worry about because they love you already, and there's going to have a very positive letter as you write it. When you have multiple recommenders in the Common Application system, you can then determine where those recommendation letters go. So if you end up asking three teachers, for example, you can say teacher A and teacher B go to school Y. You can say teacher B and C go to school Z. Again, you can make sure that the correct recommenders are getting sent out to wherever you would like to, and you can assign them that way. At the end, especially if you are a junior and coming into this process, or if you're a senior and you haven't already asked your teachers yet, please do that today. But then also ask your counselor as well what the process is, because there might be a brag sheet, there might be a survey, you might have to go through a formal requirement or a formal requesting process. So make sure that you are asking your counselor what that process looks like for your school.
Yes, depending on the school, this may also be a moment where either SCORE or Naviance is going to sync with your Common App account so that your letters of recommendation are handled through Naviance or SCORE rather than the Common App specifically.
Moving on to the rest of the schools tab, individual colleges will have individual questions that they want to ask. It might be around your status as a legacy student, or whether you have any contacts at the institution, what major you want to apply to, what school within the university you want to apply to as well. Make sure you click through every tab and answer every question first, because that will then inform which essays pop up for you. There may or may not be additional essays in addition to the Common Application essay or the personal statement that you'll have to write in order to apply to that school. Again, depending on what the answers are on the subsequent questions, you might have more or fewer essays. For example, some schools might require an essay for a specific kind of applicant to a specific major or specific school. And also keep in mind that essays might be somewhere other than the writing tab. So when you click on the schools tab, they'll have a whole list of other menu options that are academics and contacts and family and writing. And you think, great, the writing section is here. This is all I have to do. But suddenly there's an activity section and there's an activity essay in the activity section as well. And you don't know that until you're about to submit, and then you panic, and then you're upset. So please make sure that you are clicking through all of these things to make sure that you have all the information that you need and all the essays that you need as well to submit a complete application to that school. Many of these essays do not change year to year. However, we have noticed some trends of things going away, that some schools are leaning away from certain types of essays, and we can answer some questions about that in Q&A if we'd like to as well. But overall, a lot of the fundamental essay topic types for these supplemental essays do not change. And we do have some kind of common essay types that we will see year to year. The personal statement, perennial, you'll have that every year. There are questions asking you about why you want to attend a specific school or apply to a specific major. Questions about community, your most important activity, And then also the miscellaneous fun ones. The University of Chicago ends up asking kind of fun, quirky essays every year, depending on how you think they might be more or less fun for you. But either way, these are the general types of essays that we see year to year. Within these types, we don't necessarily see a lot of changes. But again, if there aren't changes, we'll absolutely let you know that, and then we'll adjust accordingly as we move forward.
Okay. So you've made it through with this so far. You've done the work. You've filled out all the sections on the Common App. You've gotten your recommendations. You're in great shape. So when do I actually hit submit, right? You have a few options, right? And it kind of depends school to school, right? So, and well, they're kind of listed, they're listed here, right? So, we'll start with rolling admissions, right? So schools are rolling admissions. What that means is that whenever you submit within a set amount of time, maybe a few weeks within when you submit, they'll send a decision back. That's what that means from a process standpoint, right? Now, the nice thing about rolling admissions oftentimes is that schools will be who have rolling admissions policies will oftentimes be accepting applications, later on, right? Past even the winter, right, until like the early spring. So, if you're sitting there in February, March, and maybe you're wondering, trying to find a last school or two to apply to, there may be a rolling admissions school you can apply to, right? However, with that said, it is better to apply early, right? So, examples, right? Like a pit, right? A lot of our students apply there. You don't want to, it's better not to wait until February to hit submit on that application. You want to do it sooner. And there's a couple practical reasons for that. One, you increase your chances of getting in because they have more seats left available for their incoming class. And while, and their odds are because, they haven't filled those seats yet, there may be a little bit more chance at merit scholarship money, right? So you want to submit those earlier whenever you can, but you have some wiggle room there. You have some leeway to submit later. That's the nice thing about rolling admissions. Next, we have early action, early decision. It's generally November 1st. There are some schools that have different deadlines than that. Some do on October 15th, some do like November 15th, right? But generally November 1st is the most common deadline, right? The difference between those two, which should be mentioned and considered here, is when you're applying early decision somewhere, you are making a contractual commitment to attend that school, basically saying that if I'm accepted to this early decision university, I will withdraw all my other applications, right? So make sure you really love the school before applying early decision there. Otherwise, apply early action, right? Now, for both early action and early decision, traditionally there is a boost to your admissions chances. So it's definitely worth the consideration, and especially for those early action schools, whenever you can, you should do it. There is sort of restricted early action or single choice early action. I'm not going to dive into all the details there because a lot of schools do it differently from each other. So it's kind of hard to generalize. But if you're doing that, the advice I will give you is read the fine print, make sure you understand. I would advise, if you're working with us, please reach out to us about that. Speak with the school counselor, somebody who can help you with that, because the policies are not consistent with each other, from school to school there. Something that we left a note on here is be aware of document deadlines. And what I mean by that is this. An example, we have a lot of students who apply to Penn State, right? And so before they consider your application, they're actually going to render a decision. They want you to submit everything. They want those official score reports. They want all the documents in, right? Not all schools want that, but some do, right? So you need to be aware about whether your school requires that. And if you're applying early to Penn State, right, that means that all the official stuff needs to get in before November 1st, right? So it's not that I just can hit submit by November 1st and be fine. I need to get all my documents in time, right? Now, different schools will handle that differently, but that's just something to be aware of if you're looking at an early decision in an early action school. The next cursor, couple options you'll have is early decision 2 and regular decision. Now, there's not a ton of schools that offer early decision 2, but there's a decent number of them. You're still making that early decision contractual commitment, but it's a later deadline, right? So I mean, there's a kind of a category of schools that are kind of like, right, that are very prestigious, private, but maybe not quite as prestigious as the Ivies, like the Tufts or Vanderbilts of the world, who have an early decision too. And to be honest, they'll do that to get some of the students who didn't get into maybe their early decision or single choice early action at an Ivy, maybe as an example, right? So that early decision 2, if you really love a school, right? Maybe your first choice school, you apply for decision 1, you didn't get in. You have a second choice that you really like as well. You want to give your shot there. Early decision two may be a good option for you, right? But otherwise, it occurs at the same time as what we traditionally think of as regular decision, right? Which is typically around January 1st. There's some, once again, some schools will do January 2nd, 3rd. There's some variants, but it's around January 1st is that deadline, right? And that's when we think of like the college admissions deadline. That's when that is. So as far as when to submit, that's what applies there. It's a bit of a long spiel, but there's a lot of options there.
I'll also jump in here briefly just to pick on Pitt and Penn State. I know we have many Pennsylvania families in the audience. Please, for Penn State, if you are hoping to apply to main campus, despite the fact that Penn State offers both rolling admissions and early action, we call Penn State about this every single year. It was actually Kevin and Jordan who got on the phones for us this time. Penn State wants you to apply early action if you are hoping to be on main campus. We also call Pitt every single year and go, hey, what qualifies as early to you for rolling decision or rolling admissions? And they always tell us August, September qualifies as early. So no one needs to be burning Pitt's store down on August 1st, but getting that in early can be, a help for you in the process. All right, and Kevin, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, great points on Pitt and Penn State. Also a few final notes, right? Because we're thinking about hitting submit right now when we're going to do that. Before you hit submit, I think Jordan sort of brought it up with your essay, but you may want to read everything out loud, right? Not just your essay, but some of the other components, because with all those semicolons, perhaps that you used in that activity description, maybe you put one in a really weird space, and now your description no longer makes sense, right? Or maybe maybe the factual details aren't quite right on something, right? So read everything out loud, double check the factual details as a family, because sometimes, right, you maybe mom or dad heard something from the school that the student didn't, right? I think Jordan has already covered this during the essay, but I think it's worth another mention. Copy and paste your essay. Don't use a Google Doc link. We don't need to see all 70, I think it was 79, Jordan, 79 edits of your Common App essay. Now, after you submit, check your voicemail, email, snail mail. It is if you created a specific one for the admissions process, remember that you did that. Check it frequently, because sometimes you don't check it as much as you might check your main email account. Make sure to check it. Your mom and dad, you may want to have access to that too, so you can check it in case your student forgets. Set up and check your applicant portal. Not all schools have one in that way, but for the ones that do and that require things after the fact, and we can maybe get into maybe we should get into some of that, right? So sometimes after you hit submit, there's a couple things to keep in mind, right? I think we have a note here that I think is right, and one of the reasons we brought up in the document deadline, sometimes materials require a little bit of extra time to get in, right? If you go to the College Board, website, and you submit your SAT score, it's not, it could, but it may not automatically get there immediately. It should be pretty quick though, because it's all electronic. Or if you put in your recommender's email, right, it may take them a little bit of time to fill that in. Don't panic. It's okay. You can follow up. It's okay. Now, with that said, something that may prompt some panic, but you shouldn't panic for this either. After you hit submit, you may be asked for additional materials, additional forms, right? We've listed stars. There's like SWAR. Sometimes will pop up after you hit submit. Sometimes if you've applied to a specialized program, like a BSMD or an honors program, you'll be asked to create sort of a second application or something in an application portal to fill out for that program or for that school specifically. If something like that pops up, it's okay. It doesn't mean your submission went away or that disappeared. It just means that there's an extra step for that program or for that school. If you are concerned and you are still freaking out because this is an anxious time, we do understand. If you're working with us, please reach out to us. It's okay to call a school and to ask questions about that. It is a busy time of year, but admissions officers, we are happy to field those calls because we do understand that sometimes the technology is not as clear as we'd all like it to be, right? So it's okay to call an admissions office to ask questions about what something is. And also, if you're worried about that, you're dealing with the time crunch, or if you're working with us generally, please reach out to us about that so we can support you with that next step. We've done it 1,000 times before for each school, I promise you.
When it comes to how we help, of course, we are essay coaches. We provide support on every step of the essay process. But we're also here for this part, project management, setting deadlines, following up, keeping track of all of the moving parts so that all of the Penn State stuff is done and submitted by early October at the latest, so that all of those documents have the chance to get to Penn State well before their document deadline of November 1st. We'll provide college counseling to help you identify those types of schools, as well as comprehensive resources on the application process, whether that is screenshotted PDFs of how to self-report your grades on the stars or the courses and grades section, whether that's advice about how to choose letters of recommendations. We really support our students from the very beginning to the very end of the process. I believe my colleagues have dropped our consultation links in the chat. We are still taking on some students for senior year, as well as starting to take deposits and book initial consultations for juniors. So please feel free to reach out. If you have any questions that feel a little bit too personal to put into the chat, please feel free to reach out to the email address or phone number that you see on the screen here. But if you have any more general questions, I already see that we have a ton of really great questions in the chat. So let's go ahead and get into those. All right. All right. Um, so we have a couple of questions about our optional sections first. So Jordan, I'm going to let you take this one about a combination of two questions. How much information is too much in the additional information section? And how do you tackle a high school transfer?
So for the how much info is too much information, we really encourage being concise and being direct. Don't sell yourself short or don't sell the situation short, but absolutely tell us, as admission officers, whomever you're speaking to at this point, what is happening in your life, right? Especially if it is in the challenges and circumstances section. Again, we like to think about what happened, when it happened, how it affected you, and how you've moved on from the situation or how the situation has resolved. That's kind of to the point. Only because that section is very short. It's only 250 words or 300 words rather for the challenges and circumstances section, so you don't have a ton of time. Handling a school transfer is another situation where, again, we would like to be concise with it. That section is only 250 words also, so you don't have a ton of space there. But if there are any extenuating circumstances that caused you to change high schools, you moved, there was a dispute, something else happened, right? Make sure, again, you're giving the full story as possible. And then if there is any additional information to continue to add, you can always email your admission officer a brief email to say, hey, in addition to what's already there, here's a little bit more context as well.
All right, perfect. Um, Kevin, I have a couple of essay questions for you. Um, Firstly, if I'm writing a personal statement, how different should the personal statement be from my supplement essays? And I imagine this question asker is particularly thinking about why college or why major essays.
Yeah, the short answer should be very different. That's the short answer, right? The longer answer is that first, like you should we'll focus on your personal statement. That's going to go to all the schools. That's a higher priority item to work on, right? And as you're thinking about that personal statement, um, instead of thinking about your major, because you're going to be able to write about that to a specific school, try to think about something that the admissions office can only learn from that they can't learn elsewhere from your application, right? Because they're going to have your transcript. They're going to know what type of student you are, right? You're going to have some recommendation letters. You're going to know maybe like, kind of your biggest accomplishment through your activities list, right? So um, instead of thinking about the what major you pursue or what's like why you like a school, you should be thinking about what can I communicate about myself? What anecdotes or experiences have I had that can communicate, that can offer a window into an element of who I am that will show who I'll be as a community member on campus, right? So you don't want to step on the material, right? Like it's one of those things that will you get automatically rejected because there's some recycled material between two essays? No, but you're not doing yourself any favors, right? If you write a personal statement about why you want to study biology, and then you give us a supplemental essay that recycles 90% of the same material with one additional note, right? You're not doing yourself any favors. And it's hard also, right? Because the purpose when an admissions office asks you a supplemental essay question, they're doing so with purpose, right? They wanted something specific they couldn't get from the Common App. So if they're asking you, right, like, why do you want to study here, right? Or why are you interested in our school? And you're giving them a bunch of redundant material, I think it might be fair for them to ask, like, are they really interested in our school? They didn't it doesn't seem very detail oriented or specific to us if we're recycling a bunch of material in a few different places, if that makes sense.
And I'm going to piggyback off that and talk a little bit about the specifically why us and why major essays. In that, one of the things that we help our students with a lot is making sure that those why us essays, while they speak to the student and what they're interested in and what they hope to accomplish, that they're also married to the specifics of the university and that they talk about the specific coursework or the specific professors or the specific, for an engineer, maybe the maker spaces or the co-op opportunities that show that are on that specific campus in a way that isn't just let me read your course bulletin back to you, but let me envision what I could see myself doing with this degree in business and how I could see that contributing to what I want to do with this degree in the future. All right. Um, Jordan, talk to me about demonstrated interest. How do I
Mm.
know who considers it? And what do I do about it? Should I email you a billion times, former admissions officer?
It depends, which unfortunately is the most common answer in college admissions. So, demonstrated interest, for those who do not know, is the generalized term for interacting with an admission office. That can be anything as the admission office defines it. Anything from being on their website, to spending lots of time on their website, to watching the videos that they send you, to opening emails, to clicking links in the emails that they send you, to visiting campus, to going to college fairs. Anything like that can count as demonstrated interest. Now, not every school is going to care about demonstrated interest. How you find that out is through something called the Common Data Set, or CDS, which is a set of publicly available data that a vast majority of schools will have. There's a section in there that does talk about a demonstrated interest, and we can help find that for you as well if you end up working with us. But if a school knows that they are very, rather that it is important or very important, we do recommend that you email the admission officer saying, "Hey, I have a legitimate question I would like to ask you," or visit campus, or go to the high school visit if they come to your high school, or do something in your area. This means that it is a factor in their admission criteria, and they do want students who want them or who have gone through the process of vetting, getting more information, thinking about what that college process will look like at that institution. I used to work at American University. Demonstrated interest was huge at American University. So I would have students emailing saying, "Hey, I'm interested in this thing," and we would note it down, and that would be a factor in their admission decision. So A vast majority of students will not, rather, a vast majority of schools will not go through that same level of demonstrated interest in tracking that. But for the schools that do care about it, it is a very important part of their application process.
All right, perfect. We have so many questions. All right. Um, we have a logistical question about the FAFSA form and merit aid. So just a quick moment to talk about different types of financial aid. So merit aid is something that is offered to students regardless of financial need. It is an incentive to a student to attend the university. Hey, I'd really like you to come here. We're going to give you 5,000, 10,000, however many dollars a year it is to make our offer feel a little bit more appealing. That is merit aid. That is something that students can be considered for regardless of any financial need. And it is something that you do not have to fill out any financial aid forms to qualify for. You don't need to fill out the FAFSA, you don't need to fill out the CSS profile. Depending on the school, there may be some scholarship essays they ask you to write, but that is entirely independent of financial need. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It is the public form that a family would fill out to be considered for grants, loans, or work study through the federal government. There are also state programs for that. There is also the CSS profile, which is a similar form that is often used by private schools. They calculate estimated financial contribution a little bit differently, but we're not going to get into the details between those two. Generally, though it has been a little bit different over the past couple of years, the FAFSA has been undergoing some renovations. They've had a little bit of difficulty in that process, which has resulted in the FAFSA being released later than normal. The FAFSA usually opens in October. So for some families, that means you may have already submitted rolling admissions, uh, applications or early action or early decision applications. In this case, you can absolutely go ahead and put in applications. You do not need to wait to fill out the FAFSA. That is something that schools will take into consideration later on. All right. Um, Jordan, I've got a question for you that I think might start with clarifying early decision versus early action. What's the difference between the two, and how many early decision applications can you do?
So early decision is a binding agreement between you and the school that you are applying to early decision. It is a commitment. You are saying, if you admit me, I am coming here. You are my first choice. You have to sign an agreement. A parent has to sign an agreement, and your counselor has to sign an agreement as well. Early action is still earlier. Both early decision and early action have earlier deadlines, and you also do hear back earlier. However, early action does not have any binding agreements. It just says, I'm interested, I want to go here, and I want to know a little bit earlier. It also means that if you apply early decision and early action, you're prepared to be evaluated with your current junior year grades only, because most other schools where you apply regular decision will have your first semester senior year grades to consider as well. You can only apply to one early decision school because you cannot split yourself in two and go to those two schools that admit you early decision. Early action, you can apply to as many as you would like. That is completely fine. And we do recommend that if students are prepared and have their materials ready and feel like their freshman, sophomore, and junior year grades are representations of their academic achievement, then apply early action. That's totally fine. But again, early decision, only one.
Yes, with the exception of early decision two. Essentially, technically, a student could apply early decision twice. If a student applies to early decision one, This is usually the application that is due on November 1st. Students typically are going to hear back in and around mid-December. If the student is accepted, great. We break out the champagne, we withdraw all of our applications from our other schools. Great. It's done. We're settled. If a student is denied or deferred from their early decision one school, they are then released from that agreement. For denial, it's pretty easy. Like the school doesn't want the student, so the student can apply wherever else they want. For deferral, the student will still be considered in the regular decision pool. In that circumstance, a student can then apply to a early decision two school. Because they've been released from that early decision one agreement, they can then make another agreement for early decision two. Those deadlines are in and around January 1st, and they will hear back, February, March, April. All
I
right.
think just a quick addition to that is that as a reminder, if you are applying single choice early action or restrictive early action anywhere, not many schools do it, but some schools, say like Harvard, right, have one. You need to read the fine print on that because that could affect your ability to apply to other schools early in some way, shape, or form.
All right. A couple of logistical components here about when to apply and what to send. Um, Other than making sure all of the documents are in, is there a reason not to apply early? Could you use the extra time to add more activities? As long as you're not applying rolling admissions because earlier is going to be better in that circumstance. As long as a student's application is in well in advance of the deadline to allow for hiccups, counselors forgetting to send the transcripts, copies of SAT scores falling off USPS trucks, all of the myriad things that ways can go wrong. Once you have budgeted for that time, there is no advantage to applying extraordinarily early for a early action, early decision, or regular decision deadline. Just make sure that you give yourself enough time for all of the myriad ways that things can go wrong. Um, we have a question about resumes. Some schools will offer students an opportunity to submit a resume. Not all schools will. Um, the majority of a student's activities should be captured in their activities section. Even for schools that offer a location to put a resume, it's often not something that you need to do, except in a circumstance where the resume is going to be notably different in some way or another than the activities section. And there are a few sort of select instances when that would be the case. All
I
right.
will also say that I think on the common application it says this too, or maybe on school websites as well. It is not a resume is not a substitute for the activities section. You need to fill out the activities section on the common application because that is the official designation of your activities outside of school. This can be school activities, this can be non-school activities as well, and the community as well. But you have to fill in up to those 10 slots. The resume is just a bonus.
All right, we've got a couple of questions about letters of recommendation. Kevin, do you want to take these? What is the maximum number of letters of recommendation to send per school? And what is the typical amount of letters of recommendation that a school would want?
Okay. So, I mean, it's one of those things that like two or three is kind of the more this typical we see students using for most schools. I will say that like while some schools don't have a stated max, I wouldn't go much further than that, just because A, like you have sort of max number of slots, B, you have how many teachers actually know you that well and will say good things about you. You're kind of right, maybe harkening back to the advice we gave regarding waiving your FERPA rights, meaning that you're waiving your right to look at that letter. For a couple of teachers who really love you, there's low risk, there's no risk in doing that. If you're sending, if you have 5, 6, 7, 8 letters that you are just using overall, and you're sending a lot to multiple schools, you kind of increase the risk there. So, 2 or 3 is kind of what we see typically for most students at using 2 different schools.
All right. Just as a note, because we do want to answer as many questions as possible, and be respectful of everyone's time, we are also answering some of your Q&A questions just in the chat, so please keep an eye on that as well. All right. We have a question about the activity section here. For the activity section, is it only supposed to be school activities? And in a word, no. If there is something that you are doing which is productive, which takes up your time, which is important to you, it belongs in the activities section. That can be clubs, sports, volunteering through school, but that can be part-time jobs, that can be hobbies, that can be family obligations, that can be engagement in your community. One of the things that's actually new for the Common App this year is the responsibilities and circumstances section. We didn't spend too much time on it in the activities section because it is a very select circumstance, but Common App now gives students who may have to take on a caretaker role or work to support their families an additional location where they can indicate that. So honestly, I sometimes tell my students if it's not something that you were literally doing in class and it's not you being on TikTok, it counts. All right. Um, all right. Jordan, do you want to take this one? Does early decision affect merit aid?
Great question. It depends. Again, the most common answer. Um, Good institutions will say no, that every single student is evaluated exactly the same for merit aid, whether you apply early decision or early action. One of the things that we would say when we were working in admissions across the schools that I worked at, mostly just American actually and USC, when because those were the 2 schools that offer merit aid, is that if you are relying on merit aid to make ends meet, then that's not something you can guarantee unless you're applying to a school that has very clear merit aid guidelines. Early decision, again, is that binding decision that says this is me making a commitment. However, schools also know that finances are an important part of a decision to make for where you're going to college. So most schools that offer early decision will try to give an or rather try to give a financial aid package along with that admission decision, or at least soon after, so you have that information. Once you've received that package, you then have the opportunity to have conversations with that school if something doesn't work out. You might have to provide additional documentation. You might have to say, hey, this is why we might need some more money, and here's some proof for that as well. But after many, many, many conversations, and after talking to the admission office and talking to the financial aid office, if ultimately it is going to be an incredible financial burden to attend that early decision school, that is how you may be released to be able to apply elsewhere for other more affordable options. At the same time, we hope as coaches and also as former admission officers that you as a family and as students and parents will have the conversation about what is and is not realistic for finances. So again, early decision can sometimes affect financial or merit aid. Unfortunately, in the way that you're probably thinking, in that early decision students, since they're already locked in, colleges might say you don't need to necessarily give them as much because they're already coming here because they're already incentivized to be here. That being said, again, if there are concerns about that, we encourage you to reach out to the individual schools to see what may or may not be realistic with that merit decision for early decision.
Yeah, I think as an additional note, right, a lot of the schools that you may think about applying early decision to, which tend to be more prestigious. A lot of students want to go there. They tend not to give a lot of like tend not to give these huge merit aid packages typically anyway. So you may want to keep that in mind. The second thing is that, and I think speaking to the question that somebody else posed in the chat, right? Like you probably shouldn't make getting in the AD school and then ducking out if you don't get the merit aid scholarship, merit aid you want as part of your strategy, because it's a contractual commitment. You can't really guarantee, right? You're going to just automatically get out of that contractual commitment. Now, if you act in good faith, as Jordan says, you have those conversations with the schools. We have seen instances where like, hey, realistically, that can happen. And maybe, for example, we are in 2025. Maybe you worked with the federal government until recently and you lost your job. So maybe your income from, the year or two ago doesn't reflect your current situation. Schools will try to work with you in those situations. But you need to at least try to work with them.
Perfect. A quick SAT, ACT question. If your ACT or ACT scores are comparable, I'm, picking the very high numbers because I don't, in fact, have the SAT, ACT concordance memorized quite yet. I'm working at it. But if you've got a 36 and a 1600, it doesn't matter which one you send. In that specific instance, why not send both? That's impressive. But for a specific instance where, they're more reasonable scores, you can simply pick one and send it. All right. So, as a reminder, go ahead. We are answering some of these questions in the chat. I'll go ahead and take one about if you intend on double majoring, how do you handle either supplemental materials, either essays or portfolios offered by those schools? Depending on the school, there will be one of two circumstances when it comes to an essay. A school may, for instance, ask you to speak just to one major for your first essay and then ask you to write a second Y major essay for your second essay. The other option is to be transparent. The vast majority of students are going to change their major during the course of their 4 years. Kevin, if you remember the exact percentage, feel free to chime in. I just remember that it is a lot. Do you remember how many students changed their major?
I don't. It depends how you look at it, right? Once they declare within their school,
Mhm.
it's around half. If you're talking about the percent difference between like when they're putting stuff into their Common App or their application and what they end up majoring in at graduation, I think it's more like 70 or 80%. So there's a lot of changes that will happen over the course of those 4 years.
So for the broader Y major essays, it is all right to be honest and to go, there are multiple things that I am interested in. I am considering double majoring. Or I am undecided and I'm really looking forward to figuring out how classical literature and biology intersect with each other. And there are absolutely some schools that love the intellectually curious interdisciplinary student that really respond to essays of that type. You're not making a contractual agreement when you're writing a Y major essay. When it comes to supplement for portfolios, that's something that's going to vary from school to school and by the type of portfolio you're submitting. Feel free to reach out to us and we can have more conversations in detail about the type of portfolio and the school. All right. We have a question about applying early to schools. And I think this is once again a question about applying early decision versus early action. So, for early action, remember this is the non-binding application type. If you have a strong application, good grades, your essays are done, your activities are polished, you are ready to submit by well in advance of that November 1st deadline so everything can get done. There is no reason not to apply to as many of your schools that offer early action. Early action. It means you hear back earlier. That feels great to get some decisions back and know that you will have options at the end of this process. It also gives admissions officers sort of additional choices when it comes to deciding what they want to do. Because with an early action candidate, they have the option to accept, deny, or defer. So you can get a second bite at the apple. If a school needs more information, you can be deferred to regular decision. Early decision, that's the one where there really is a decision to be made because you can only make one early decision application. Um, and that's something where we always advise early decision is a commitment that you make with your heart, not with your head. In the worst case scenario, it is always a little bit easier to deal with having put your best foot forward and taking your best shot and getting denied than having made a strategic choice and passing up on taking your shot at a school that is potentially, your dream school, your number one choice. One of the thought experiments I often posit with my students is think about it this way. You've applied early decision. You got in. This should be one of those moments for celebration. How are you going to feel when you go to your computer and withdraw all of your applications from all of your other schools? Because that is something that will give you a lot of information about where you should be applying early decision. All right. Um, Kevin, what are some personal statement topics that should be avoided?
Okay.
I know it depends, but go for it.
The long answer is it depends, but the short answer is stuff that is going to definitely show up, as we discussed it in the within the webinar. It's definitely going to show up in your supplementals. A decent percentage of your schools will ask why you want to major in something, stuff like that, right? Typically doesn't belong in the personal statement. The second thing I would look to as a topic to avoid is something that is overly cliche, right? So it's one of those things that the issue isn't necessarily a topic, it's a theme, right? So if you're writing an essay about your experience with sports, right, you don't want to write about winning the big game or recovering from that shoulder injury and how the perseverance got you through, or you found out, or you won the big game at the end of it, or you found out it was the friends you made along the way. Those are cliche angles to that topic. The third thing I think you want to avoid is something that is not personally illuminating, right? I think in this world where we are bombarded with on TikTok, Reddit, wherever else, things that suggestions for quote unquote good essay topics, that we try to do the most unique or quirky thing possible. Engaging writing, unique topics can be good, but if we don't learn anything about you, it doesn't serve its purpose, right? Um, don't give us an essay about why croissants are awesome. Even if you can write a really interesting sort of thought piece on why croissants are awesome, if I don't learn anything about you in the process, then it didn't serve its purpose, right? Even if it was a great essay, because the personal statement is not intended to be a writing sample.
All right. Jordan, any additions you want to make to that one?
I think, as Kevin said, we just need to make sure that we, admission officer, whoever's reading your application, learns something about you. I really, my pet peeve in this field is when everybody thinks that they have to be completely unique, that you have to write about something that no one else has ever written about before. That is certainly not the case. All we admission officers, coaches want is your distinct perspective. You're not the only student, or your student is not the only one who has done a certain thing or been a part of a band or played soccer, but their distinct perspective on what it means to be a midfielder, for example, one of the positions in soccer, or what it means to be second chair, or what it means to do the things they do and see the world in the way that they do. That's how we can make a quote cliched essay topic a little bit more distinct. And there's nothing wrong with playing soccer. There's nothing wrong with being in a band. There is something wrong, again, as Kevin said, of just saying that I'm in a band, isn't that cool? And then you move on. And again, I don't learn anything about you other than the fact that you're in a band.
Okay. And then one of the things I want to highlight here is in many ways we're going to land again on that answer of it depends. There are many topics that could be difficult to write about, but if the student has a specific angle or a particular story where their authenticity shines through, it can be a topic that is at least worthwhile exploring. And Jordan, one of the things that I've heard you say when you talk about this is you can write about a common topic, but you can't write about a common topic commonly. All right, got just a few questions to take care of here. Thank you so much for hanging with us tonight. Um, we have a question about reporting AP scores. Generally, fours or fives, always send them. For a three, it is going to depend on the context of the major that the student wants to apply to, on how they did otherwise in that class. It may be in a moment where if the student has an A in the class, they've demonstrated enough that they've already learned the material, especially if it is a subject that they're not necessarily going to major in. So in that instance, it may not make sense to send the three. That's something that's really going to vary sort of case by case. All right.
I see a question here about athletics, whether you are actively being recruited or whether it's something you just hope to play in college, maybe at the D3 level. The general advice there, I would say, is try to get your materials done early, even so because your the schools recruiting you are going to want to sort of look at you for an early reading round. So you want to get things done early so they can consider you early and kind of can consider that as part of their admissions process.
All right. And then I think we're wrapping up with a last question about letters of recommendation and essentially the number that you can send. If you have a bunch of good recommendations, this is going to um, be dictated by the school. Schools will only allow a certain number of letters of recommendation. I'm gonna pick on Pitt here. Pitt won't let you send any letters of recommendation because they just don't want them, except for a counselor recommendation. That one they want. So that will depend. Schools will determine for themselves which letters of recommendation that they are willing to accept. For optional letters of recommendation, we would advise quality over quantity. If you have a strong third recommender that shows the student in a notably different light than the other two letters of recommendation, that's a great moment to use a third letter of recommendation. But if it is essentially going to be, a positive but kind of bog standard academic reference of, if the student participated in class, did all their work, whatever it is, and you know that the previous letters are going to say similar things, there isn't a need to send that optional recommendation. That's another one where this is truly optional. All right. I saw one last one come in. Yes, even if you quit an activity, go ahead and get credit for it if you did it for some part of high school. Everything counts on the activities section. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for spending this time with us. We hope this was a helpful pass at the common application and enjoy the rest of your night.